Escape will make me God. This was the line that defined Marathon. It summed up the world and the narrative, and even the gameplay to an extent, very well. Funnily enough, if Bungie had escaped Marathon's IP for their newest game, perhaps they could have restored their godlike status among the industry. If you think you would want to play the old Marathon games, then leave this video, do it now. The whole trilogy is free on Steam, or if you don't like Steam as a platform, then they're available as standalone programs that are even open source. If you find its gameplay too inaccessible for you, then I encourage you to at least watch a walkthrough of the series at the very least. I honestly find the story that good. I'll put some links in the description for you, not just for the downloads but also for the walkthroughs, just in case. This is your last warning before I spoil all of Marathon with reckless abandon. Okay, now that you've definitely experienced Marathon on your own to some capacity, let's talk about it. Marathon isn't necessarily the best shooter series, even among the relatively small number of shooters I've played, but it's arguably left the strongest impact on me. While the level design at times drags this series from a solid 9 or even 10 down to a 5 or a 6, I find a lot of what it does to be really engaging, from the atmosphere, to the gunplay, and especially the shotguns, to the enemy designs, to, of course, the story. Each game opens up in such a cool way too.
We're clear. See your star side.
They do a lot to immerse you. The desolate, spacey sound of the music in the first game, and the ambient sound effects of the latter two games gripped me immediately each time. I love how they all drop you straight into the game, and trust that you care enough to walk up to the terminals to get your bearings and learn what's going on. What especially helps, and especially in Marathon 1, is that if you walk straight up and start reading the terminal, you can get blindsided by enemies, or if your wits are about you, the sudden ambush from the start can make you start asking questions, which of course the terminal will then answer. It's creepy and unsettling, but everything pulls each other together, and thus pulls you, the player, along. The whole series plays out like this, and it's a winning formula. Getting your bearings and then attempting to fulfill the mission you're given is honestly a lot of fun the way it's presented. It helps that your mission is usually framed as more than just kill all the enemies or get to the end of the level. Even if it does sort of come down to that usually, the technology really just wasn't there yet. Instead, they have you rescuing BOBs, the born on boards, turning generators on, accessing data chips, and so on. It wasn't the first game to be narrative-driven or blend narrative and gameplay together by a long shot, but I do think it was a pioneer in the industry regardless through its execution. Once the series developed in 2 and Infinity, the larger map sizes even started to allow for more optional content in areas that purely exist for immersion. One example that really stands out in my mind is in Infinity, where there's this entire jail area that's completely optional. There isn't even any reward at all from what I know. I hated that area on my first playthrough, but I love it now. It adds so much to the world within the game's limitations. I really don't want to sound like a contrarian here, but I even love the idea behind the infamous colony ship for sale cheap level to some degree. If it had all of the switches in one room, it'd be a neat gimmick that adds to the world building, like someone on the marathon was in charge of operating even minute things like the stairs, which does make sense considering Durandal's original purpose. That's my general overview of Marathon, but what really sticks in my head usually, and probably most people's, is the pacing of the gameplay, and of course the story and the world building. The story, despite really grabbing me from the beginning, starts off pretty standard all things considered. You're on a ship, the enemy aliens are boarding it, and you gotta send a distress signal to Earth while warding them off. The pragmatic and distant feeling AI of Lilo really helps this mood, which really lulled me into this false sense of what these games would really become, especially having played Halo 1 through Reach before these games. But then Durandal shows up. He steals the show. This character, who only interacts with us through his own monologues and a few smaller actions in gameplay, shines through and becomes the series' identity. He lies to you, he forces you to do missions for him, and he revels in what he's doing, like some kind of insane puppet master. It's really engaging. Leela tells us he's gone rampant early on, but we only get tiny glimpses of him before his entrance, and his entrance has a huge impact. Like he's a much scarier threat in his introduction than the 4. His insanity really enthralls players who get far enough to meet him. Of course, with a character forcing so many weird wrenches into the story, you'd expect the pacing of the game itself to be all over the place, or at the very least extremely fast. But that's the best part though, it really isn't. Durandal leaves you to your own devices sometimes, just giving you some end goal and letting you figure out the details yourself. You end up exploring a lot on your own, and the levels can get maze-like or even open to accommodate this. You can get surprised by enemies and allies alike. There's usually just enough enemies on any given map to give you enough forward momentum, and during the more exploratory moments, they can become a great marker for where you have or haven't been. Sometimes, of course, the enemy density gets really thick, and you find yourself frantically trying to get an advantage, or a way to escape danger. Escape will make me God. That's the second time I've said that now, and aside from the dramatics, it's also a good segue to talk more about Durandal. If it isn't obvious already, I love his character. He's a ton of fun. But there's one thing I think more casual fans, even including myself, sort of miss about these games and Durandal himself. He's really only this crazy in the first game. Let it be known, he's still written in a very entertaining way in the rest of the games, and especially in Infinity, but he's not quite the same. He matures, or maybe he just copes with his rampancy in a way that makes me think he's matured. Either way, he has so much time between games that it makes sense. After securing his alliance with the Sphit in Marathon 1, he really focuses on them and almost feels sort of fatherly from there on to me, despite me knowing that they're just a means to an end for him, and also him admitting that he cares more about humanity. Anyways, Infinity is its own beast, but he's weirdly enough one of the less crazy elements of that game, even considering his merging with Thoth later on. The ultimate vibe I ended up walking away with is that until the later parts of Infinity, I'm the pawn in someone else's game that I simply cannot comprehend. The AIs are far too advanced for me to do anything about them ultimately, so I just have to go along for the ride and hope for the best. I mean, even in most of Infinity, you're just hopping between working for Thoth, Durandal, and Tycho, with no clear reason why or how you benefit from it at all. All the while, you're dealing with your own psychosis. Or is it a recurring dream? The insanity of the characters, and again particularly Durandal and then later on Tycho, feels like it's supposed to make them feel that little more out of reach. Leela, who's originally played as that stereotypical distant and pragmatic AI, ends up feeling the most human at times because her goals were your goals, and she really just wanted to help you in the end. This is really important to understanding the overall narrative, I feel. The games want to constantly make you rethink the entirety of the games themselves over and over again. Otherwise, they wouldn't reference Teilhard de Chardin, the Piltdown Man, mythologies in general, and certainly wouldn't lay out Infinity the way they did. The player, by the time the electric sheep levels start reappearing, should almost feel like they're going insane themselves from trying to mentally process everything that's going on. It's a really cool narrative effect that you don't ever really get from much media outside maybe some murder mysteries. This isn't even mentioning the layers of conspiracy of the UESC, Earth and Mars, Maida and Strauss, shadow governments in Tau Ceti, Strauss and Durandal, and so on. This almost schizophrenic atmosphere isn't just set dressing, it's the substance of the whole narrative. It's all furthered through the gameplay, by the way, which is really impressive for a game series that in hindsight is so simple in its mechanics. They cleverly use a lot of little tricks to achieve these effects. The constant swapping of which team you're on can lead to a lot of shocking moments when the bobs start shooting you out of nowhere. The almost random teleportations definitely made me do some double takes, and the removal or addition of certain weapons into my arsenal always kept me on my toes. I have to mention the electric sheep levels again because those are so interesting that on my first playthrough, I almost looked it up to see if my game was glitched or something. It messed with my mind that badly. Though, that is in part because I stubbornly reused an earlier exit once or twice and repeated some levels, which honestly elevated everything for me. These examples mostly come from Infinity, which did have the two previous games to juxtapose and build itself upon. But even when you take the whole series into perspective, the whole overall layout is just interesting. You have a standard start, insanity ensues, we get a return to normalcy for a while, sort of, and then the player themselves kind of start going crazy as everything feels like it falls apart at the seams. That is why people talk about Marathon's story, I think. It makes sure you don't know what to expect, and even goes so far to make you rethink everything you know over and over and over again. The games play similar tricks on you through the Spit specifically too. They start off as one of the first enemy types you see, right after the basic 4 soldiers, but curiously they tend to be busy with the computers, and more often than not they have their backs to you. Then you learn that they're enslaved and don't even want to attack you. But then you free them, and by destroying their mother android thing that controls them, they end up helping you fight. Then Marathon 2 comes around, and we see their homeworld, where their relative species, the Flicta, are all hostile. But then we see the Ticks, which are completely docile, and I don't even think they have a way to hurt you outside the hardest difficulty. Oh, and some Sphit are still enslaved, so some actually are still hostile. And you also end up being forced to work for different people eventually, meaning that the Sphit are sometimes your enemies regardless. And then you have Dreams, where they show up and they're aggressive too. What are you supposed to make of all this? Exactly! That's what I love about it so much. From the settings to entire species, I'm constantly getting disoriented. It's one of the best strengths of the sci-fi genre in my opinion, just how much you can disorient, misdirect, and play on the expectations of the audience nearly effortlessly. Even beyond the Sphit, we get to feel the weirdness of the aliens through exploring the almost gross interiors of some of the 4 ships, the strange architecture of the Lawan planet, learning about creatures like the Drinial, and having it all be juxtaposed by the very familiar vibes of the Marathon itself. Mentions of the Yarrow, the Sphit Car, and the apocalyptic Workin Kakinter ties it all together too. It's so hard for someone to pronounce or read Workin Kakinter on a first playthrough that it just makes everything feel so out of human reach. I really hope I'm not overselling the series if you somehow got this far in the video without experiencing it. All 3 games are certainly flawed, but I've omitted almost all of my complaints because I need to highlight the good of these games. After playing as many games as I have, I tend to honestly embrace the flaws of an artwork as one of the things that makes it unique, sort of how a lot of artists' styles come from their own flaws as an artist. If you couldn't get into Marathon, and especially because of the gameplay, I don't blame you. It took me a couple tries to have it click myself, and I didn't have fun every step of the way either. Like I said, that level design can be awful all throughout the games, but I hope that you can see just how special these games are, and not just to me, but to the overall gaming and specifically the shooter zeitgeist that would follow it and its much more popular successor of Halo. By the way, if you want to know more about what makes Halo so special, then I really encourage you to watch this video I made about Halo and its inspirations. It goes deeper than you think, and it might even help you if you're a creative type. I hope all of these videos do, but yeah. Marathon is a series that, if it ever had a new installment of any sort, would have some very particular shoes to fill. Is what I'd say, but let's be honest here, Marathon was never all that popular. I can almost guarantee that if you're watching this video right now, you either know it from the new game or from those Mandalore videos that got really popular. Unfortunately, Bungie probably viewed Marathon's IP as a launching point for their own new world after Destiny, instead of as its own incredible work. And honestly, I think that mentality shows in this new Marathon game. This is probably what you clicked on the video for, so let's talk about it. And just as a disclaimer, this is based on what we're given right now, so the game could change through iterations or deeper dives in its seasons, but since I only have what's been given to me to go off of, I'm analyzing that. If you somehow watch this years after release, let me know how right or how wrong I am. Anyways, without further ado, I'll be completely honest. I am, to some degree, a purist. But hear me out. This isn't to say I don't like change, but I think that change needs to be very thoughtful and considered, because even small changes can completely alter something's identity. This is to say that when Marathon 2026 got announced, I was not at all excited. An extraction shooter could technically work considering the setting, but the visuals didn't say Marathon to me, as cool as they were at times. And while the very in-your-face, whoa, so crazy marketing felt fresh compared to other AAA games, it didn't feel like the poetic and lyrical Marathon. Escape will make me God. They used that a good amount in the marketing. It's Durandal's most famous line, after all. This is how you know it's Marathon. It's crazy, it's paranoid, it's honestly wrong. I'm not going to say that the famous line itself is incredibly deep or nuanced, nor will I say that quite a few of Durandal's monologues really are either, but there is nuance in the context of them. They catch you off guard, they completely go against the setting, which is very orderly for the most part, well, at the start. The aesthetic of the new Marathon is really cool to me. I like how crazy it all looks, and it utilizes colors and styles we don't see often anymore, like the greens and blues and the serif fonts. But the devil is in the details. And I want to break down all the things about this new Marathon that really make it fall apart to me. And yes, this includes the gameplay, which honestly bored me so much that I tried very hard to say more than just one or two sentences about it. The first thing that struck me was all the preamble. You have to go through this tutorial that simultaneously teaches you everything and nothing at the same time, and it does so in the most straightforward, almost flavorless way possible. Then you need to poke around a bunch of menus before being sent off on your first real mission, and at this point I really started having my eyes glaze over. Look, I'm not an adrenaline junkie, and I actually really like a lot of games that focus more on menu navigation and intelligent setup, but this just doesn't feel like how you're supposed to do it. I see all these companies, including quite a few that are references back to the original Marathon, but I wonder why I should even care about them. They don't reveal much of anything to grab a hold of me. I get all these text pop-ups that overwhelm me at first, but I actually become underwhelmed by the menu itself and its layout. I know what I've played is just a public demo, and it has limited options available to me, but it leaves a horrible impression, especially for a game that's supposed to have a slow drip of content in seasons. Just you wait until I start talking about the actual game, by the way. But, in order to even play the game, I need to choose a character. I can't stand these character designs. They all sort of have this almost Y2K era goth alternative vibe to most of them, except John's security officer here and the Rook, but they're all just ugly, either through their design or through gross smaller details that just add up. Again, except John's security officer, he's alright. And also the Rook seemed okay-ish once I unlocked him. All of these characters, aside from their looks, also have their own traits and abilities. It's all decently standard fare, especially if you've played Destiny, But needless to say, I honestly found this to be the most fun decision making out of the whole game. Even if I did admittedly just play the default character every time. It's fine though, that's what I chose for myself. What can I say? I'm a sucker for his design. The options are all distinct enough despite how many times I've seen their archetypes before, and they all have a good amount of use cases. I particularly found the SWAT shield ability to come in handy to help my teammates scramble to cover in a pinch, which was pretty neat. That was a fun moment actually. Is the rest of the game fun? I wish. I really do. Remember how earlier I mentioned that Marathon's atmosphere, story, and gameplay all had a strong effect on each other and led to some usually really good pacing? Marathon 2026 does not have that. In one mission, I think I shot maybe 5 bullets. You could be thinking that since extraction shooters are high stakes, it must be because I was spending that time being very careful and making tough decisions about what I had on me, right? Well, you'd be wrong. The loot pool was pretty low, and the spacing of the maps meant I didn't have to watch my movements so much. Enemies can do a lot to complicate those elements for the better, but there's a painfully low amount of enemies on the maps, and when there are some enemies, the extremely low time to kill will counteract a lot of the fun that can be had with the combat. A lot of the weapons feel like they're made for a more straightforward shooter, not really a tactical one. This is compounded by the mobility and ability options, where you can dash around enemies, blow them up with missiles, and so on. It just feels disconnected. I didn't really care about the stuff I was looting either. I noticed very little difference in my loadouts, and the item loot never felt significant aside from things like shield and health regen items. Maybe I'm just not very familiar with these games, but I should be noticing something at the very least. So looting and the PvE elements aren't that great, but extraction shooters are made to have potential PvP as well, so how does that fare? Well, it kinda doesn't, weirdly enough. There doesn't seem to be much incentive to be friendly in Marathon, and the game even encourages hostility, so most people just kill each other on sight. The game's more exciting that way anyhow, so why not? Especially in the demo I played where it just doesn't matter. And apparently, it won't matter much in the main game since they said they'd reset everyone to 0 every season for the sake of fairness. Unfortunately, even despite their efforts to encourage it, the PvP falls flat, and this is how the PvP doesn't really fare at all, let alone well or poorly. Enemy players feel very similar to the UESC robots, and since the time to kill is roughly the same, it just feels like fighting slightly more intelligent enemies. That's really rough, especially compared to similar games like Arc Raiders, where spotting other players can be really exciting and make each mission feel different from the last through your interactions with each other. In this game, players are just another obstacle. I ended up saying more about the gameplay than I thought, but honestly for a game, my dissection of it should be more than just a couple of paragraphs. That goes to show how bland the mechanics are. If you played most shooters in the past 10 years, you're likely very familiar with almost everything going on here. And if you played an extraction shooter before, this game won't feel all that special. Bungie didn't really step outside the AAA comfort zone much in this regard, and the player counts as of this recording kind of reflects that lukewarm feel. But what got people talking about this game wasn't the gameplay, it was the aesthetics, the world, the vibe. Did they escape convention? And if so, did it make them gods of the industry? No. Are you getting sick of that line, by the way? I hope so, because I am too. And get ready, because you're probably going to hear it again before the video ends. Gosh, I wish I could reference the other terminals. They're all so good. Maybe I'll do that at the end too. I'm getting ahead of myself though. Aesthetics. People never really talk about the old Marathon's aesthetics, and maybe it's because it's decently average for its time in terms of fidelity and all that. I think there's great attention to detail, particularly in certain color schemes, but I can understand why people don't talk about this part of the series much. It's pretty typical retro-futurism to an untrained eye, but since sci-fi has changed so much and taken on so many different aesthetics since the mid-90s, it feels really refreshing to me. It has interesting palettes, inspired and otherworldly designs, and it can even lull you into comfort just to rip you out whenever it wants. I feel like so much sci-fi nowadays is just blue, glowing Magitech stuff, So even though the new Marathon doesn't use the original's cool retro futurist elements so much, it still feels very unique right now. Uniqueness isn't always worth it though. You need to consider what your world is and how you want to achieve your narrative or atmospheric goals through your visuals. Bungie used to be really good about this. Halo in particular stands out so much for having this really lighting-heavy approach to the first game, where the more realistic elements of the art style blend with the fantastical ones underneath this really interesting lighting to make everything feel so surreal. It's great. The Marathon trilogy is another good example, where the more typical palettes on the Marathon are really nicely contrasted by the weird purples and greens of the 4 ships, and the more natural tones of Lawan. Even the Marathon itself deviates from its conventional palette at times to striking effect, making you wonder just how this moon-turned colony even works. This new Marathon has an emphasis on contrast and blending of elements too. It tries to contrast nature with UESC facilities, but it just doesn't feel the same. These facilities feel clean and sanitized, but they also use these giant blocks of bright, almost neon colors a lot. It feels very at odds with how the UESC is presented in this game. You could say maybe that's the point, but who are the UESC trying to trick with pretty colors when they only station bots on these maps? In fact, what's even the point of having color there at all? The game is really heavily stylized like this at all times, with colorful guns with giant pixelated numbers on them, but then the computers look like they belong in the 80s with green tinted text and chunkier CRT-like designs. I feel like the point of this entire style is contrast, and it's supposed to even overwhelm you at times, but instead I just feel off-put and even underwhelmed, like it's not even finished. I think with some tweaks it could work on its own though. If you want more punkish elements, make the guns reflect that and replace the white in the environments with darker colors. If you want more retro-futurism, make the guns less blocky and put some LCD screens on them or something, and focus more on metal over the plasticky look. I could go on, but here's the point. Trying to have what almost feels like a perfect 1-to-1-to-1 ratio of all 3 styles just doesn't look very good to me. Everything looks fine in a vacuum, and I particularly like the graphic design of some of those posters, even if what's written on them is eye-rolling. But mixing it all is making people look away from the game. This is to say nothing of the environments shown to us so far, which look too much like Earth to me. Seriously, if you replace the skybox with more clouds instead of the moons and planets, you'd think we're on Earth, which is a shame for this IP specifically. And yes, it does work in Halo, by the way, partially due to that surrealist nature, but also because of the lore of that game. Graphics aren't everything though, and like I said much earlier, for most people the best part of Marathon is the story and the world, so how did those fare? Remember how I talked about nuance earlier? The nuance of the crazy parts of Marathon? Well, that's really all gone now. The UESC are the bad guys because, and I'm paraphrasing here, they're controlling and think they own Tau Ceti. Really? The UESC is controlling and act like they own the universe? Did they forget that this description actually perfectly describes the 4? Like, that's their whole shtick. That is their identity to most people. The UESC aren't ever really shown as objectively bad guys, unless you consider Durandal or Tycho to be UESC aligned, which you're just wrong if you do. They're rampant and thus act on their own accord. It's not just nonsensical to the original world building, but it's just so played out. This isn't a political take, but establishment bad or government bad is so tired and isn't even interesting on its own. Those sorts of statements are smaller parts of conclusions made from greater philosophies and ideologies. Give me something more. Also, considering a bunch of companies exist and send runners out to loot and sabotage the UESC, surely they can't be all that great at controlling or taking things. Also, is the constant graffiti saying that the UESC lies or that we shouldn't trust them really necessary? It feels like it's trying so hard to capture that crazy vibe, but it's so cliched. We've had this type of graffiti in mainstream games since, what, Portal? If you're looking for an example of a more nuanced take on the UESC being morally dubious, well, The original Marathon had a perfect example in one of its terminals, and it seems to be kind of the basis for what this game is based around. It talks about why the Marathon was made, with it being a sort of last resort the UESC had to turn to while Mars unfortunately ran out of resources. It was a tragic moment in the universe's history where Earth just couldn't stabilize Mars, nor could they send resources in time. It's framed where the UESC might have done this almost intentionally, but it's left vague for personal interpretation. It runs deeper once you learn about Maida and Bernard Strauss, how other human colonies went to war with each other, how the colonization of Tau Ceti might be a devious plan itself, and so on. The rabbit hole really runs deep here. Other moral questions come from putting some big picture elements under scrutiny, hiding these themes just below the surface, like how Durandal simply operated doors for the Marathon, despite being a hyper-intelligent AI and almost like a child to Bernard Strauss. I swear some of Durandal's early monologues are supposed to reflect this too, like how he recites lines from the Song of Roland, or shows his capacity to do highly complicated math, or just his overall plan in Marathon 1 going almost perfectly. Perhaps it's just because we've only gotten so little, but this new Marathon has made very little effort to show anything to this degree. Everything is so cut and dry. Almost everything has been played so standardly, especially when it comes to the UESC, the aliens, and the AIs. How does the UESC know so much about the Spit and the Ticks, by the way? I thought those were completely new to us come the first Marathon game, when Leela tells us Durandal figured out what the 4 and Spit even were and relayed that info to us. What's going on there? And if the UESC are our enemies, and have a similar setup to the 4, and the Spit and other Marathon enemies are in the game, why is the UESC our main enemy faction? It feels so weirdly safe. Take me to Lawan to fight the 4 and bring important loot back to the Marathon to aid in the UESC and the Spit's war against the 4. Wouldn't that be cool? Get this, the 4's Holy War basically has no end to it anyways, so you don't even have to worry about writing into a corner. You have so much potential right there for your seasonal game. As it turns out, I did a little digging and found the answer. Apparently Tau Ceti 4 was colonized by humans, and the 4 had attacked multiple times, and either the humans won every encounter and then died out, or lost the second one and all died as a result, until not so long ago. Durandal was even here, but he's gone now? Off doing his own thing, I guess? So all the interesting stuff already happened, and we're just left with a basic synopsis of, the government is hiding stuff, figure it out over the course of multiple seasons. For a reboot, I can't stress enough that they've created a much more watered down version of Marathon despite this. Let me give you an example, just in case you don't believe me. The Spit are said to basically just be human-like brains with advanced nervous systems in the original Marathon. Lo and behold, in Marathon 2, we see the Ticks, floating brain-like creatures with wings. I don't think it's ever explicitly stated, but there has to be some sort of relation to the Spit, especially considering they're both native to Lawan, kind of, and it's said that the ancient Yarrow cybernetically enhanced the Spit into what they are now, so perhaps there's a common ancestry there. It's not out of the realm of possibility, considering the Flicta and the Spit also share common ancestry. This is all coming from me, by the way, a more casual player with no extensive knowledge of every single terminal. This is all gleamed from the easier to find terminals, and what I'm left to figure out myself is very satisfying, even if I'm wrong. So what's the lore presented to the average player in New Marathon for the Ticks? They are carnivorous creatures that spawn in larger numbers, are territorial, and explode, and visually they don't look anything like the Spit. So they're just exploding bugs. If you've never played Marathon or even Halo before, they might seem like a decently striking basic enemy, but I just see them having used a Marathon creature name as a cover-up for a reskinned Halo Flood type enemy. This kind of watering down extends to the terminals as well, by the way. So many of the first ones you get are very boring tutorial-like text dumps with shockingly little flavor text, like the one on the Ticks for instance. Only a couple really caught my attention, like an interview with Bernard Strauss, whose name should be familiar to any original Marathon fans, but it's like a small fleck of tarnished gold in a sea of gray. Going from the original Marathon with deep terminal text referencing these primal stories we've kept for centuries like the Song of Roland, or the disturbingly well-written but nonetheless incredible Hangar 96 terminals, to these terminals feels like such a disappointment, especially since some of the writing in Destiny was clearly inspired by Marathon terminals and sometimes even reached similar heights. Maybe you're getting sick of all these little examples, but here's another one, because seeing is believing sometimes. Here's an excerpt from the aforementioned Hangar 96, one of the most memorable and famous monologues from the terminals. I'm getting sick of coming back to Hangar 96, but there's no avoiding it. This is what my existence needs. My existence is the demise of many others' arms and legs. The world is not a good place, nor is there innocence for me to hide in. 761 pairs of eyes look around the room aimlessly, and mine join the crowd. I see these bodies, massacred, immobile. For all the carnage here, the stench of decay is non-existent. I try to turn away. The hangar spins, but nothing moves, and my view is the same. While this is certainly one of the more flavorful entries in the Marathon series, I want you to contrast the language and the writing style with this Marathon 2026 entry about an interview with Bernard Strauss, with the topic being on AI. Intent as a standalone consideration is not enough, as intention can be encoded, actions set in motion by predetermined instruction, engineered call and response, a list of tasks to be repeated, a program. In short, intent can be nothing more than the purpose-built illusion of an active, adaptive intellect, typically in the form of a product designed solely for convenience, masquerading as an evolutionary leap in technology. If you're a fan of this new Marathon, I'm not putting you down, and if this is what it takes for you to get into the series, then I'm happy. But critically speaking, we need to view this from every angle, including the angle of why they'd even use the Marathon IP for this game. When it shares so little with the original series in so many ways, and removes or simplifies so many smaller details that made the setting stand out so much, what's the point? Surely, it would have been more beneficial to take a lot of these ideas and build a new world off of it. I mean, it's worked literally every single time Bungie's done it, and Bungie also hasn't been shy of having spiritual successors and heavily sharing world building anyways. I should note here that Halo was intended to be a spiritual successor to Marathon, with plenty of similarities between the Four and the Covenant, the Mjolnir security officer, and Master Chief in his Mjolnir armor, certain enemy archetypes and names, and then of course the UESC and the UNSC. And even in this new Marathon, you can see Halo influence it back, with the ticks becoming more like the Flood or the two-gun limit being introduced. I understand I'm in an extremely small minority here, as the total number of original Marathon fans might be in the tens of thousands, but you can only really stand to lose with this sort of setup. New players get a watered-down world that feels like it's lacking something that they can't put their finger on, and this will only be exacerbated if old fans, like me, voice just how much better certain things were in the original. I can't stress enough how much I dislike my apathy towards this overall product, but I hate being critical with no strong idea of how to fix it or redo it. So just like my Halo video, I'll give a brief example of how Bungie could have made an extraction shooter out of the Marathon IP. This will be a drastic departure from what we currently have been given from Bungie, particularly in terms of style, but again, the point is to show how specifically Marathon as an IP should have been brought back as an extraction shooter. Let me know if you think this would have been a better product than what we're getting, by the way. I'm going to start with the overall setting. Marathon's setting is its claim to fame, so I'm not changing it at all, or expanding the world out very much, since this is just a reboot or a continuation. Instead, we're only going to expand where need be. You work with Durandal under the UESC while the security officer is MIA, so this is taking place between Marathon 1 and 2. Durandal is far more interested in the Sphit and Lawan, so we're not on Tau Ceti 4 anymore. We're on Lawan. It is a spacefaring sci-fi game where we're light years away from Earth, and I really want it to feel like one. The Four are attacking, so those are the majority of our enemies, and we add a few different Four troops where need be, particularly in the fighter, the trooper, and the enforcer ranks. Of course, the other enemies will definitely still exist too. The Hulks, the Hunters, the Juggernauts, the 4 drones, the Lookers, and Wasps all have really good use cases to fill, and even Flicta can fill out some swampier areas. Most of our enemy work is really done just from that, honestly. Lucky us too, they have robots and androids that they make, and so long as it's a little gory looking, or if it looks like some sort of sentinel or knight, any new enemies along those lines will fit in nicely. I know the new Marathon wanted to look different, partially through color usage, and while I don't think the light blues and all that are a particularly good fit outside maybe some very particular areas, I know what is, and that's purple. While some maps would be on Lawan, some can be on vulnerable 4 ships where the level design would be massively different and have entirely different palettes using more unnatural colors. What about the guns? Marathon 2026 leaned very heavily into having unique gun designs, so how do we achieve that? Well, pretty easily. I don't see why the 4 wouldn't have confiscated UESC weapons to reverse engineer or just study for the sake of creating countermeasures later on, so they could have those locked away in vaults and storage. There you go, something to loot. Aside from that, the 4 already have a bunch of weapons we could use, like the Enforcer's alien guns, the weird spear staves that the fighters use, and so on. Again, the robotic enemies could all have weapons that your character could scrap from them upon defeat, and having your weapon be something that you ripped out of a robot would look really raw and distinct from anything I've played. Marathon has a pretty gritty world, so that fits pretty well too. I hated Marathon 2026's time to kill, so I would nerf everything just a little bit, and buff melee so you have more of a risk-reward of going in close and then weaving back out. Marathon was a difficult game in the first place, so dropping your guard to go in for strong melees wouldn't necessarily make the game depart from traditional extraction vibes, but even if it does, at least it makes it more distinct, right? New Marathon adds a lot of new mechanics compared to the old series, like jumping, movement mechanics in general, and character-specific abilities that almost feels like a hero shooter, and I don't think it's all a great fit, despite me praising it earlier. Here, we're going to play it more straight. You're just a Bob, a born on board who got conscripted by Durandal. He's crazy, so he doesn't care about your qualifications so long as you're doing his dirty work. This also means he's not so shaken up if people die, so long as you come back with what he wants, allowing PvP to exist in a very natural and player-driven way. You could even have the stuff the Reboot has about the biomechanical bodies that your brain controls too. That honestly isn't a bad fit for Marathon. Just make sure the visuals match everything else. Either way, you're just a pawn to Durandal, and as such you don't have anything too special to start with. You can float and have a pathetically small jump, and maybe even the ability to clamber since you're weak. You can get movement upgrades as loot, making exploring for the loot more valuable intrinsically since it means you get to have more fun interacting with the environment. It also makes PvP more interesting since you now have an incentive. You might want that movement upgrade another player is clearly using. The movement upgrades and abilities themselves would lean into Marathon's world still. I'd have protection from your own explosions as one, which would allow for rocket jumping with a lot of weapons. Then maybe like a much stronger jump height, nullified fall damage, etc. Nothing too exciting on their own in these examples, I know. But again, the vibe is that you're really on the back foot against the 4, and using any little thing to even the playing field. A lot of the flashier elements of the game should be coming from the weird guns you get off your enemies anyhow. You can have a field day with those effects, since we only got a small taste of that in the old games. Missions would be pretty standard stuff, I think. Sabotage 4 facilities, steal schematics or data, even petty looting wouldn't be too out of the question, especially for beginners. The maze-like structure of levels in Marathon, if done admittedly better, would honestly be an interesting fit for a game like this too, since you'd feel more compelled to stick with your teammates and you'd have plenty of places to flank or get flanked. In a multiplayer setting, it has a lot of potential, especially with all the notorious doors and stairs that activate if you shoot the switches. I'd honestly use those switches a lot. I'd say let people walk up and activate them with a punch or something too, but activating them upon shooting is such a cool alternative since it costs ammo and can attract unwanted attention. I've mentioned PvP already and how there's incentive to fight each other, but to balance that out, I'd also give players the incentive to cooperate through randomized bonus rewards. Maybe Durandal knows of some cache somewhere and teleports items to you if you don't waste his resources. Those resources, of course, being other players. Now, players would have to decide between the guaranteed loot off of another player or the potential bonus from Durandal. We can sweeten that randomized deal through giving players methods of swaying that RNG in their favor, of course, and at higher levels PvP is still a strong option since better players are almost guaranteed to have better equipment on them. Maybe my admitted unfamiliarity with the nuances of this genre are showing here, and particularly I can see how looting might feel less important later on if you never die, but I hope in theory at least it toes that line nicely. For the record, incorporating PvP into tougher missions would definitely be a thing too. I can see Durandal doing that considering the tricks he pulls on you in Marathon 1. Honestly, maybe even having players get sorted into either Team Durandal or Team Tycho could lead to some interesting tug of war, like a player-driven version of Helldivers or something. And that's mostly it. I'm not interested much in talking about companies or factions outside what I just mentioned, so I'll briefly do it now. If those have to exist, I'd present them as the other AI options, of course. Leela and Tycho have interesting and different enough personalities to make it interesting. You could incorporate 4 or Sphid AI as well, and if it has to be brought in, then yes, even Thoth makes for a good faction since it's so obsessed with balance. I want them to be more confident in these callbacks across the board though. They really like referencing one particular line, going so far as to have it as one of the first achievements you get. But Marathon runs deeper than that. Embrace that. As for other things like seasons and microtransactions, my solution is this. Seasons are fine-ish, so long as they aren't just vessels for putting players on a treadmill and making them grind out meaningless battle pass rewards. Hopefully, having a fun difficulty curve, the multiplayer elements, and a good and constant introduction of new enemies and terrain mechanics should be enough to keep people playing. If you absolutely need to have microtransactions in the game, they have to be cosmetic as always, and obtainable without paying. And I'd also make sure that it's all obtainable once the servers go down. That's actually the last thing I want to mention, longevity. In order to let the game exist for decades and onwards, even a multiplayer game needs to have some kind of end-of-service plan. Let players host their own servers when that time comes, or offer some way to experience the game in single player at the very least. I know that's kind of tough with this genre, but still. It's important not just morally since people paid you money for the game, but also for the sake of preservation. For longevity in the other sense, I think having players be more tied to their faction can play more into the long-term player counts than people think. Some numbers representing how much better a certain faction is doing compared to the others can go a surprisingly long way. Marathon is one of my favorite settings in media, and while it's not a perfect series by any means, it's an overlooked gem that has a lot to offer. I hold it in high regards, and respect the legacy it's had not just at Bungie, but in the games industry as a whole. I can tell that even with almost every Marathon developer now gone from the company, Bungie still respects its legacy too, even if it's not entirely sure what to do with that legacy. I want the best for Marathon. Despite how negative I was in this video, there's some good in there, and hopefully in time a lot of my complaints will seem silly and maybe even paranoid. It has a long time to prove itself after all. We still have T-15.1937921021158E plus 9 years until the universe closes. And in regards to Bungie's creativity and budget, the only limit to their freedom is the inevitable closure of the universe, as inevitable as your own last breath, and yet there remains time to create, and escape. Escape will make me God. Give me an S, give me a U, give me a B, give me an S, give me a C, give me an R, give me an I, give me. What does it spell? Subscribe? No. Subscribe? No. More videos. I promised a review of Elden Ring Night Reigns DLC way back when it first came out, and even had the script finished, but life got in the way so much that by the time I had free time again, this marathon playtest came out and I knew I had to make a video on that. I don't want to make any promises, but if I review the script and feel like it isn't complete slop, I'll make a video on it. I said this earlier in the video, but I want these videos, especially after the Halo one, to feel like you can walk away from them with something, especially if you're a developer or just someone looking to better explain why you like or dislike things. Speaking of developers though, I'm a developer and I'm still making a game. It's actually finished, like I finished the whole thing. I'm just adding some polish to it here and there. I have some people doing some last minute QA testing on it, and then I'll have it up on Steam to wishlist and all of that very soon. And expect a video about it soon too. If you're watching this far because you're a shooter fan, you'll be disappointed by its genre, but if you're curious, I tried playing around with conventions of old Zelda games for it, so if that sounds interesting, then stick around. And thanks again for watching. I'd love to see you leave a comment, and if you have any positive feedback, I'm all ears, so let me know what I'm doing right or wrong. Have a good one. And to that one guy who told me that my audio levels were imbalanced, I hope I fixed it this time. Please, 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 please.
I'm the world's greatest soldier.